and by the work of several other scientists. After his voyage, he worked for many years developing his theory of evolution, which he referred to as natural selection. In this lesson, we will describe the conditions for natural selection, explain what evolutionary theory suggests about the unity and diversity of life. Evolution by natural selection is based on the struggle for existence, variation and adaptation, survival of the fittest, and all of that leads to natural selection. Charles Darwin worked out the main elements of his theory about natural selection soon after reading Thomas Malthus and thinking about artificial selection. His scientific friends urged him to publish his brilliant arguments. Darwin did write up a complete draft of his ideas, but he put the work aside and didn't publish it for another 20 years because he knew that many scientists, including some of his own teachers, ridiculed Jean-Baptiste Lamarck's ideas. Darwin's theory was just as radical, so he wanted to gather as much evidence as he could to support his ideas before he made them public. In 1958, Darwin reviewed an essay by Alfred Russel Wallace, a British naturalist working in Malaysia. Wallace's thoughts about evolution were almost identical to Darwin's. Not wanting to get scooped, Darwin moved forward with his own work. Wallace's essay was presented together with some of Darwin's observations at a scientific meeting in 1858. The next year, Darwin published his work on the origin of species, which described his ideas in detail. Wallace had the right idea, but Darwin had data and observations to support his hypotheses. Darwin's contribution was to describe a natural process, a scientific mechanism that could operate like artificial selection. In On the Origin of Species, he supported his ideas with arguments from Malthus and Lamarck. Thomas Malthus's work had convinced Charles Darwin that if all populations have the potential to produce more offspring than can survive, members of that population will compete for a finite supply of environmental resources. Darwin described this competition as the struggle for existence. But which individuals would succeed in surviving and reproducing? Here is where natural inheritable variation took center stage in Darwin's thinking. He hypothesized that individuals with certain types of inherited variation are better suited or adapted to life in their environment than others. Members of a predatory species that are faster or have longer claws or sharper teeth can catch more prey. And members of a prey species that are faster or better camouflaged can avoid being caught. Any heritable characteristic that increases an organism's ability to survive and reproduce in its environment is called an adaptation. Adaptations can involve body parts or structures like a tiger's claws, colors like those that make camouflage or mimicry possible, or physiological functions like the way a plant carries out photosynthesis. Many adaptations also include behaviors, such as the complex avoidance strategies prey species use. Charles Darwin, like Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, recognized that there must be a connection between the way an organism makes a living and the environment in which it lives. According to Darwin, differences in adaptations affect an individual's fitness. Fitness describes how well an organism can survive and reproduce in its environment. Individuals with adaptations that are well suited to their environment can survive and reproduce and are said to have high fitness. Individuals with characteristics that are not well suited to their environment either die without reproducing or leave few offspring and are said to have low fitness. This results in differential reproductive success, or as some have termed it, survival of the fittest. Note that survival here means more than just staying alive. In evolutionary terms, survival means reproducing and passing adaptations on to the next generation. In this sense, survival is about more than just an individual surviving, but a species surviving. If an organism produces many offspring, but none of them reaches maturity, do you think the organism has high or low fitness? Well, if an organism produces many offspring, but none of them reaches maturity, then it has low fitness because offspring will not pass on their traits to the next generation. Adaptation and fitness are important terms to understand. They're basic to your comprehension of the process of natural selection. Go back and review those two terms, adaptation and fitness. Try to apply them to specific cases and to think about examples of adaptations and how they increase or decrease the fitness of organisms in which they occur. Charles Darwin named his mechanism for evolution natural selection because of its similarities to artificial selection. Natural selection is the process by which organisms in nature with variations most suited to their local environment survive and leave more offspring. In both artificial and natural selection, only certain individuals produce offspring. But in natural selection, the environment, not a farmer or animal breeder, influences fitness. Natural selection occurs in any situation in which more individuals are born than can survive the struggle for existence. Natural heritable variation affects the ability to survive and reproduce. This is variation and adaptation. Fitness varies among individuals. This means that they have differential reproductive success. Well-adapted individuals survive and reproduce. From generation to generation, populations continue to change either as they become better adapted or as their environment changes. Note that natural selection acts only on inherited traits because those are the only characteristics that parents can pass on to their offspring. Look at the images. They show a hypothetical example of natural selection. There's variation in nature, and certain heritable variations called adaptations increase an individual's chance of surviving and reproducing. In this population of grasshoppers, heritable variation includes yellow and green body color. Green coloration is an adaptation. Green grasshoppers blend into their environment and so are less visible to predators. Describe this image. Because their green color serves to camouflage them from predators, green grasshoppers have a higher fitness than yellow grasshoppers. This means that green grasshoppers survive and reproduce more often than do yellow grasshoppers in this environment. Notice how this set of images demonstrates natural selection and fitness. The percentage of green grasshoppers increase and yellow grasshoppers decrease. Green grasshoppers become more common than yellow grasshoppers in this population over time because 1, more grasshoppers are born than can survive. 2, individuals vary in color, and color is a heritable trait. And 3, green individuals have a higher fitness in their current environment. Well, what if the conditions were a little bit different? For each step in the figure, think about an alternative situation. What if there were brown grasshoppers in addition to yellow and green grasshoppers? What if in the winter the grass turned brown? How would that change in the environment change the fitness of green, yellow, and brown grasshoppers? Natural selection depends on an individual's ability to reproduce and leave descendants. Just as well-adapted individuals in a species survive and reproduce, well-adapted species survive over time. Charles Darwin also proposed that living species are descended with changes over time from common ancestors, an idea called descent with modification. Over many generations, diverse adaptations to changing resources that are limited could cause a single species to split into two or more species. For evidence of descent with modification over long periods of time, Darwin pointed to the fossil record. Note that this process requires enough time for all this descent with modification to occur. This reminds us how James Hutton and Charles Lyell's work supported Darwin's theory. Deep time gave enough time for natural selection to act. Darwin's idea that natural selection and adaptation can produce new species offered an explanation for the diversity of life shown by the very first evolutionary tree. This tree thinking implies that all organisms are related. Look back in time, and you will find common ancestors shared by tigers, lions, and cheetahs. Look further back, and you will find ancestors that these felines share with dogs, then horses, and then bats. Further back still is the common ancestor that all mammals share with birds, reptiles, and fish. Far enough back are the common ancestors of all living things. According to the principle of common descent, all species, living and extinct, are united by descent from ancient common ancestors and exhibit diversity due to natural selection and adaptation. A single tree of life links all living things.